Hi, Nana. Hi, Dee and Yusuf. Thanks for saying hi and checking in. Okay, I'm going to get started. So, of all the things you could be doing today, why are you listening to this talk? And really, this question comes down to motivation. And before we talk about productivity, before we talk about all the hacks and tricks and how we use neuroscience to improve our productivity, we have to start by talking about motivation. And so, in a world where you could be doing so many different things, it's vital that we start with thinking about what is the motivation driving us to do a particular thing at a particular moment. And there's lots of different types of motivation. And it's really important that for optimal productivity, we have the green juice version of productivity. We can have healthy types of productivity, unhealthy types of productivity, driven motivation. And so it's essential that we think about how can we have nutrient dense motivation really fueling our productivity, because it's going to be much more sustainable over the long term and ultimately will be more enriching for you. And so the two different types of motivation we have are extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation are things like getting paid, looking good on Instagram photos if it's your motivation to lose weight, other sort of external factors that drive us to do something. So, for example, with listening to this talk, the external factors might be that you want to impress your boss, for example. I know we're all freelancers, so maybe that's not the case. You want to impress someone by saying you went to a conference and you paid attention, or maybe you just want to have something interesting to talk about over dinner. Those are all external factors. And although they can be helpful, they're not the healthiest form of motivation. They're not going to keep you sustainably interested in something and engaged. And also, they're not going to lead to optimal memory retention. The other type of motivation that is fascinating and is so much more motivating and effective and sustainable is intrinsic motivation. And that really comes down to your sense of self. So, with something like listening to this talk, intrinsic motivation is the internal desire to learn. So, it's you saying to yourself, I am the type of person who loves to learn, loves to increase my productivity, loves to always better myself, loves to share facts with people. I am the type of person who. And so, before we start talking about productivity, before I share this session today, it's essential that you are able to frame in your own words why listening, engaging, learning these concepts is a fundamental part of who you are. Because only by doing that will you be able to learn. There's this great quote, the teacher will arrive when the student is ready. And I think that's important for so much in our life. And I think, we go to these online conferences, especially today, and we forget that it's so important that we really reflect on why we're there in the first place. And, it's a reflection of Simon Sinek's talks and his philosophy. But I think that we can boil it down to everyday activities and events such as this. Really asking yourself, why am I here? And why does engaging in this subject and engaging in this topic relate to who I am as a person? So I guess for me, talking about productivity and neuroscience is a part of who I am, because as a person, I'm fascinated in human behavior and the fundamental reasons why we do certain things, why we don't do other things, why sometimes we do the things that are bad for us and not the things that are good for us. I just find that fascinating, and I get so much joy out of it. So thank you for listening to that bit of an introduction before we get into productivity and neuroproductivity. For the rest of the conversation, I would love, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat. I'll quickly refer back to it, and make sure that I address things as they come up. And we'd love this to feel like a bit of a dialogue. It's interesting, I can't actually see how many of you are here, and obviously can't hear you speaking, but Would love to get your questions coming through and do some back and forth. And if you need me to talk slower, if you need me to repeat something, please just comment and I'll be able to do so. So for the rest of the session, I'm going to start with introducing who I am while you're listening to me today, something that you might find interesting, some work that I've done in Egypt and the Middle East. Then I'll tell you the scientific or neuroscientific basis of productivity, and what are the 3 neurotransmitters that work to drive productivity. And then we'll go through each of those neurotransmitters as a lens to talk about some really practical tips. So it's actually going to be quite light on the scientific component, but I hope that giving you a little bit of an overview of the 3 neurotransmitters will give you a sense of neuroscience and how neuroscience is being used to actually apply to our everyday lives. Because that's where, for me, I find it the most interesting. I don't spend my time in a lab. I spend my time mostly reading articles and thinking about what the practical applications of scientific, rigorous research are to our everyday. Like, how can I use what is at the forefront of science in labs and universities around the world to help me accomplish tasks in my everyday and hopefully help you do the same. So that's what we'll be doing today. So who am I? I know that I would usually start a presentation with this, but sometimes I think it's a bit more interesting to get into the subject, and now I can introduce myself. So I've spent my career as a strategist, working mostly in advertising, then building tech products, then working in healthcare. I've lived in London, which is where I'm from, moved to San Francisco, to Los Angeles, and then worked in Egypt for a little while. And now I'm actually based in Lisbon, where I'm freelancing kind of in the digital nomad scene. So very much a part of the communities that I think the audience at this event are in. So as a strategist, I worked for brands like Google and Facebook in San Francisco and built apps and websites for them and designed the brand strategies. So for example, Facebook launched their kind of Supreme Court of the internet last year, and I led the brand strategy on that. And something that you might find more interesting is a couple of years ago, I worked with Bassem Youssef on Plant B and was the strategy director for that program, where the objective was to reduce obesity in the Middle East. And the strategy by which we did that was to inform people in the region of a plant-based diet, but through the lens of comedy. So I don't know, has anyone seen Plant B, or is anyone a fan of Bassem Youssef? Wait for some comments to come in. I hope so. It was amazing to work with him. And we shot a 6-part sitcom that I find very funny. And then there were 20 additional episodes. And you can see the picture in the middle. Bassem made me come on one of the episodes to talk about cholesterol because I'd done so much research into health and nutrition for the program. And it made me so fascinated in the subject. And I think, again, to that point of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, the thing that really led me to work so hard on that project and love it so much was awareness and understanding of nutrition and health is, I believe, a part of who I am. And so because it's so intrinsic to my identity, I was able to stay motivated. And I think that that's such a valuable lesson to learn in terms of productivity. And there's a few other projects. So alongside my professional work and strategy, I've always done social impact side projects. And I think it's a fascinating, incredible way to showcase your skills, because if we're waiting around for clients and businesses and bosses to give us opportunities to show off our capabilities, we might be waiting a long time. So I think there's something really profound and important in showing our own capabilities through our own projects. So one of those I did was a project for the homeless, where it was a shop where you could buy essential items, and we distributed them to people experiencing homelessness. Another one was a notebook, and every notebook that was sold, we gave one to a child in a school who didn't have one. And another project was at the top in the middle on the screen, you can see a bed cover with a glow-in-the-dark message to help children overcome their fear of the dark. So there's a few of my projects. And then I'm studying neuroscience at the moment. I'm about to complete my degree this year. And I am just about to launch my first book called The Purpose Myth. So the book is really based on this idea that this 9-to-5 job is sold to us as being the pinnacle of success and what we should be aiming for. And that if we find this elusive, amazing 9-to-5 job, that we will fulfill our life's purpose. And I think that that's really damaging and unhelpful. And I think that there's actually a role for side projects and creative social impact side hustles to play in being a much better delivery tool for purpose in our lives than a 9-to-5. And so I've written a book about it. It's here. I'm very excited about it launching on January 5th. So I'd love to the launch event. We'll have psychologists, economists, entrepreneurs, designers, a creative director in agency in London, a psychologist in Los Angeles, and a few other amazing people that I've loved working with over the years, amazing entrepreneur in LA. So if you want to sign up to the event, I think there are a few tickets left. They're all free, by the way, on thepurposemyth.com. And I'll also share it in the chat afterwards at the end of this session. So I hope that you'll follow the book and how that goes after the launch, and hopefully a few people will read a copy. Move on. So does anyone have any questions about my work or background? Feel free to add those in, and we can come to them at the end. Otherwise, I will move on to the sciencey part of productivity. So I'm going to try and keep this simple, but please add your questions if you have any. There are 3 neurotransmitters, which are chemical messengers in our brain and between our brain and muscles that communicate things through our body, basically. The 3 neurotransmitters involved in productivity are dopamine, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine. In order to think about this quite simply, you can think about dopamine as the reward system in the body. So when your body starts to recognize that there are things that are good for it, such as exercise, healthy food, being in fresh air, then it starts to release dopamine just before you receive those gifts. So interestingly, there's been a bit of a shift around the understanding of how dopamine works recently, and we talk about it as the happiness neurotransmitter, but really it's teaching your brain what's good for it and what's good for your survival. It can get hijacked by things like drugs and alcohol, but primarily it's there to tell us what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. So we can think about dopamine really simply as the fun neurotransmitter. So the second one is noradrenaline. This is most closely related to fear and the fear response, the fight and flight response. So this is something else that can be really helpful in productivity. And for all of these, we'll be going through the very practical tips that you can use in order to modulate one of these neurotransmitters to be more productive. So with noradrenaline, it's really understanding how can we use fear to actually help us be more productive? How can we use fear in a positive way? So, for example, with a talk, I feel a bit scared. You know, it's quite daunting to speak to people you don't know. I hope that you'll like this presentation and find it interesting, but that's a bit scary. But interestingly, it's that fear that probably makes me sit upright a little bit, be more engaged, be a little bit more specific about what I'm talking about, put more care into the presentation. And so fear can be really helpful in the right doses. And it's really understanding your own relationship with each of these neurotransmitters to understand how you can be the most productive. So this is different for everyone. And I really want you to keep that in mind, especially as I go through the specific tips. And then finally, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that enables you to focus on something. So, when you're talking to someone and then your phone rings and you want to look away, but you know that that would be rude, so you're going to focus and you're going to pay attention to something, that is driven primarily by acetylcholine. And it's really important for learning, for memory, and for emotional intelligence and building social relationships. But also, if you're reading in public, it's the neurotransmitter that enables you to focus on the words in front of you and on the book in front of you, rather than looking around at what's going on and being distracted by the noises and words that other people are saying around you. So again, acetylcholine, really important for focus. And then all of these neurotransmitters, and to be honest, there's lots more, but these are really essential in productivity, work together to keep you focused, attentive, interested, and productive throughout the day. So what I'm going to do now is go through each of them and give you some really quick and simple tips for how you can modulate and affect each of these neurotransmitters and work with them to be more productive. So what I share with you now, I have to say, I do all of these things. I'm not going to tell you anything that I haven't done myself, because I don't think I could do that in good faith. And there are some tips that I've come across that don't work for me. So I also urge you, as we go through this, maybe an idea comes to mind of something you think, oh, maybe this could be interesting for me, and Charlotte hasn't mentioned it. Please feel free to share it. And also feel free to share your productivity tips. Like, how do you keep productive? I think especially with us all working from home at the moment, it's more important now than ever before that we share the tips that we have for productivity. And so I hope that you'll find these helpful. So with dopamine, I'm going to start sharing. I'm just reading a question. So acetylcholine can already be including the emotional, reptilian, and thinking part of the brain. I'm not quite sure your question, Amira, but I'm going to get back to you on that one, and I'll go through dopamine initially. So with dopamine, as I mentioned, it's part of the reward system. So if you take away anything from this talk today, it should be that your brain is lazy. Your brain's objective is to preserve energy. And to do that, it will operate on a default mode network. And we design these default mode networks based on how we live day to day. And so your brain will try to you can think of it as carving a valley in a mountain, and the water will fall down the path of least resistance. So the way that your thinking and your ideas work is that they will typically fall down the path of least resistance, but it's up to us to determine how we carve those paths. So the first thing to know about dopamine is it's essential when we're thinking about it, we eliminate distractions. So interestingly, in research, they found that having your phone in eyesight, even if it's turned upside down, reduces your IQ by up to 8 to 9 points. So something that I really like to do, as I've got it right now, I keep my phone hidden behind my computer, and having it out of sight actually increases your IQ slightly back to normal levels. It's such a powerful distraction device. And having worked for Google and Facebook, I know all of the neuroscience that they use to bake into the product to make it addictive, to make it distracting. It's intentionally distracting. So putting it out of sight and out of mind is incredible for productivity. And If it's not something you've done, it seems kind of silly and frivolous, but I've personally found it very powerful. And when we get to noradrenaline, I'll talk about one of the other tactics that I use in combination with hiding the phone that I find very helpful. So the second one is I don't have any notifications on my phone. In fact, the only time there's a notification on my phone is when it's time to go to sleep, which I find kind of funny because I also think that that's the thing that it should do the least, distract us when we need to go to sleep. Other things are keeping my phone in black and white. So the colors are really created to distract us and to attract our attention and keep us wanting more. And they act on a very primitive neurochemical level to do that. And then finally, in terms of no distractions, so this is really helpful for me, is anytime you're working, I'm sure you have this, you'll be working away and then an idea will come to mind and then suddenly you switch to another thing. So let's say I'm doing this presentation and a thought pops to my mind, oh, I have to get back to my friend about our lunch on Saturday. And so I'll switch from the work that I'm doing and go straight to writing a message to a friend. And that is, so if we switch, it does offload the burden of that thought, but obviously then we're not continuing to be focused and productive on the thing we want to accomplish. The problem with just keeping that idea in mind, oh, I need to text my friend back about lunch, is that again reduces your cognitive capacity. So a very helpful tactic is anytime anything comes to mind that you need to accomplish, write it down. And it's been proven that by writing those erroneous thoughts or ideas or things to accomplish, just writing them down on paper reduces the cognitive burden of those things that we have to do in the future and makes us more focused in the present and makes us more productive. Another thing that I really like is, and there's been research on this, is writing those lists of 100 little things that we have to accomplish the night before has been proven to get us to go to sleep on average 15 minutes earlier than not writing those things down, which I found fascinating. I'm just reading that question. So the next is, when we think about those paths of least resistance in our brain, is how can we make doing the thing that we want to do the easiest thing to do? How can we make it simple? So I always remember as a kid, my brother would lay out his uniform for the day, for school the next day, and he would lay it out on the floor with his trousers and his top and his socks and his shoes. And I found that if I have to go to the gym in the morning the next day, laying out my gym kit is such a fast track to just making it easier to accomplish that specific task the next day. And so simplicity and making our task the easiest task, the path of least resistance, can be incredibly powerful. And we can do that through habit, but we can also do that through, if it's not initially a habit, we can do that through designing our environment. So one thing that I find very helpful in increasing productivity, and I really recommend, is always create your checklist for what you want to do. I just saw some else comment, I love that. Plan out what you want to accomplish before you start your work. So you could even schedule your first 20 minutes of the day is you planning your day. But what you don't want to do is to sit down, to think you're about to start working, and then decide, oh, I need to now plan what I'm going to do for my work, because then it gets messy and we start doing a bit of work and then we write our to-do list and then we go back to another checklist, and that can be incredibly damaging to that dopamine feedback loop. So what I like to do, and as I say, I do this for myself. You know, yesterday, last night, I wrote down my list. Friday, what do I have to accomplish? So that I know when I sit down, I have a very clear plan of what I need to do. Mina, I've just seen your comment with regards to the checklist. So do you prefer to start with the hardest or easiest tasks first? I understand that there is a specific research on this, and I'd love to share that with you. Um, for me, and I think this is where it comes down to really getting to know yourself. There are different types of work that I'm more effective at different times of the day. So, for example, when I was writing my book, actual writing and the deep work of writing and not having technological distraction was best for me if I started that first thing in the morning, so between 5 and 7 a.m. But I know other writers who prefer to write really late at night. And then I typically start with a chunk of deep work, and then I will go and do things like emails, small tasks, because getting that, again, that dopamine feedback loop of checking things off is really powerful. So I know that my initial focus in the morning will get me through a big chunk of work, but then I need a few smaller tasks to keep that momentum going and to keep that dopamine feedback loop going. So things that you can check off. And that actually feeds into the second point of rewarding things. So I'm a Charlotte Cramer at Harvard University, not my surname, it's spelled with a K. And yes, Summer, I agree with your comment. Showed that checking things off of a list, so when you have your checklist, actually physically ticking things off as you go, is extremely helpful in powering productivity because it keeps you engaged. So yeah, I would just make sure that you start with the biggest, hardest, most intellectually challenging piece of work that you have, and then go through the other smaller things. Another thing that's really helpful for me is to have your one key focus. Sometimes I fall in the trap of having this really long list of things to do, big, like chunky pieces of work that realistically aren't going to get finished in a day. And then you end up feeling down on yourself, like you're not being productive, you get in this negative feedback loop. So I would recommend starting with the biggest chunky piece of work and then going through smaller pieces of the checklist. So for example, today I had my post-it note with my one thing, which was planning this talk or prepping for this talk. And then finally is you can use extrinsic motivators to keep you motivated to do something every day. So if you think about something that you really enjoy doing on the weekend, perhaps you decide, I'm going to do X every single day, and only if I do it every single day will I get to do the thing I enjoy on the weekend. And if you can stick to that, then it can be incredibly motivating. So next is noradrenaline and fear, the fear response. So as I mentioned, I like to keep my phone hidden behind my computer. And what I'll do is I'll use noradrenaline and the fear mechanism that we have in our brains to keep me motivated by setting 45-minute timers. So if you can start, you've got your plan of things that you need to accomplish, you can bucket that out into 45-minute chunks and then set timers for 45 minutes so that you have a focus and you have a goal. And once you press start on that timer and it starts going down, it will naturally elicit a fear response that will guide you to be more productive and focus on what you need to accomplish. So other ways that you can think about noradrenaline and modulating it to keep you more productive are through thinking about the consequences. So thinking about what if you don't do it? So for example, as I'm writing this presentation, thinking about what happens if I don't put together a presentation, what would be the consequences? And even thinking about that should elicit some sense of fear that will guide you towards the goal. And then another way that you can modulate noradrenaline and your fear response to get you to focus is through thinking about the importance of the work that you're doing and the end goal of it. So, for example, with this, thinking about if all these people who I'm speaking with, all of you, are able to implement strategies and tactics that make you more productive, what will be the positive impact of that? And how can that motivate me even further to write this presentation, for example, and you can use that with your own work. And then finally, acetylcholine. So with acetylcholine, as I mentioned, it's the focus neurotransmitter. It enables you to focus in on something and not be distracted by things that are going on around you. So really this comes down to the basics and thinking about good brain health, nutrition, exercise, stress reduction. If you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like you can focus, going on a 20-minute walk or doing light exercise is incredibly powerful for boosting acetylcholine. And then sleep. I cannot speak to the importance of sleep and high quality sleep more. So ensuring that you're reducing your blue light intake, turning your phone, the brightness all the way down a few hours before bedtime, ensuring that you're getting 7 to 9 hours sleep. Really 8 is optimal because the reduction in sleep actually reduces your IQ again by about 5 to 9 points, just by having 1 to 2 hours sleep loss. And also, if we think about so much we need to accomplish with others, and I don't know about you, but I'm definitely not the nicest or friendliest person if I haven't had much sleep. And I'm sure that negatively affects my work. So really thinking about how can you take care of your brain, get good quality sleep, nutrition for your brain and body, and exercise. And then finally, the notion of multitasking. I know that there's this idea that women can multitask and men can't. It's rubbish. It's a myth. Humans cannot multitask, actually. It's cognitively impossible. We can do one task at one time. We can do complex tasks, but we are unable to do 2 different things at the same time. And trying to do so will reduce our productivity in both. So ensuring that we are creating an environment that allows us to focus on one thing is important. So my final tip before we close out and I go back to your questions is something that I've been playing with as I started learning about behavioral conditioning. So I don't know if you know about Pavlov's dog. So he was a scientist back in 1902, and he noticed that when dogs saw food, they started to salivate. But he wondered, could he make a dog salivate at something that wasn't food? So he started a series of experiments where he would present the food alongside a ringing bell for the dog. And over time, he found that he could take away the food, but ringing the bell alone was enough to make the dog salivate. And so he calls the bell a conditioned stimulus. By pairing the stimulus of food with the bell over a sustained period of time, the bell alone was enough to make the dog salivate. So I wondered, how could I create conditioned stimulus for productivity? So I mentioned earlier on that between 5 and 7 a.m. was when I was most productive in writing. And I decided to particularly play with music. So I found one song that I was going to play on repeat between 5 and 7 a.m. when I knew I was the most productive, so that I could make this song my conditioned stimulus. And now, if I play this song, and let's say it's 2 p.m. and I'm working in a cafe and it's very loud and hectic, if I play that song, I am immediately productive. And I found that absolutely phenomenal and so helpful. And we can use all sorts of stimuli and cues around us to do that. So having one desk or one chair that we sit in, having one cup that we use when we're working, having one song on repeat. And it's actually been shown that having one song is much better for productivity than playing a playlist. So maybe you could find one song that doesn't drive you crazy if you listen to it on repeat. I found that very helpful. So I know we have 8 minutes left. So I'm going to move quite quickly through this summary and then go to your questions if there are any. The key things to take away. Sustainable productivity must begin with intrinsic motivation. So you must find a way that you can frame your identity and who you are as a means by which you accomplish something. So you're thinking about that statement that you can complete. I am a person who, ... Then there are 3 types of neurotransmitters involved in productivity: dopamine, fun; noradrenaline, fear; acetylcholine, focus. They're helpful to think about. And then obviously we've been through what the key takeaways are. So for dopamine, reducing distractions, making it simple to accomplish tasks; noradrenaline, giving yourself finite amounts of time that you can use to focus on a specific task; and then acetylcholine, really looking after yourself, not overworking. Burnout is not a strategy for long-term productivity. And I know it can be easy with freelancing because we feel like we have to give our clients everything so we get more work. We don't know when the next project's going to come. But it's short-sighted. And I think it's really important that we look after ourselves. And then finally, having a play with and experimenting with how you can condition yourself to be productive using Pavlovian conditioning, I think is really exciting and interesting. And I've definitely found it funny to have the experience with the song that I've played on repeat. So a few things to share are, firstly, again, as I said, I would love you to sign up to my book launch event. You can do so at thepurposemyth.com or charlottecramer.com. And feel free to email me if you have any questions about the book or anything I've shared today. And that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then look at my questions. Mina, I love your question. How to keep my mind from thinking of work all the time? Really good question, I think, especially with working from home. So something that might be helpful is to have a separator in your day so that you're physiologically telling your brain that you're moving from one part of the day to the next. And so it could be as simple as a 5-minute walk near your house if you can. It could be reading a book, but whatever it is, making sure that it's something consistent that goes from your work to your day. And if possible, trying to remove all the stimuli that remind you of work from your environment when you're not working. So even hiding your laptop or computer, or I mean, you could get creative and think about even putting a different case on your phone when it's between work and home, and you don't want to be thinking about work. But I know it's incredibly challenging. I know that meditation and mindfulness exercises work really well. There's an app called Balance, which has a year's free meditation that you might want to check out. And yeah, if anyone has any other tips for that, I think it'd be helpful. I'm looking at Basil's comment. May ask if I'm having a problem with productivity. It's better to start imminently by working for at least 5 hours today, or is it better to start step by step? Yes, better to start step by step, 100%. If I were you, I would start by just doing 45-minute chunks or even 15 minutes. And don't worry about the day. Write down the exact goal that you need to accomplish, one thing you need to do, and make it really specific. So I don't know what you do, but let's say you write, I would set myself a goal of writing 500 words in 15 minutes, set your timer, hide your phone, and do that every single day. So the vital thing is not that you go for 5 hours a day, although it might seem like that in the short term. It's that you do it every single day, because that's how we build habits. So pick a time of day and create a goal that is a little bit of a stretch. You know it's going to be hard for you to show up, but you will do it every day. And make sure you've got that reward at the end of the week. So say to yourself, for the next 5 days, I'm going to write a checklist of something that I want to do every single day for this amount of time. And if I do it for 7 days in a row, then I'm going to reward myself by doing this. And I'd love to hear how that goes. But yeah, definitely start small. Start with something that it doesn't feel too easy, because you want it to feel like an accomplishment, because that's where you'll get the dopamine reward system working for you. And then, yeah, I'm reading the next question from Aya Tarek. Please can you say again how to apply Pavlovian conditioning on myself? So pick a time of day where you know that you are the most productive, and then find a stimulus, maybe a song, or I think a song works really well, or maybe it could be a specific shirt, and at that time of day, play that song on repeat. And then over time, if you just listen to that song in your most productive hour, then at another time in the future, that you'll be able to listen to that song when you're not feeling productive, and it snaps you back into that mode of productivity. So you're curious, what is the name of the song? It's The Swings of Central Park. Let me send you a link to it. Yeah, it's a funny one, but I feel like it's very easy to have on in the background. Yeah. I would also love if, I don't know if anyone's still here, we only have 2 minutes left, but one of the projects I created for a freelance award was creating masks for doctors and nurses who didn't have them at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to share a link. If you would vote for me, I would be so grateful. You don't have to sign, you just have to click the link that I shared. I don't know if it's that way or this way. And yeah, I'd be so grateful if you would like that. And feel free to get in touch. Follow me on Instagram, on LinkedIn. And I really hope to see you at my book launch. It will be a very fun session. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.